Okay, so says the Gemara. If you have in mind that impure people should eat it tomorrow, you're chayev, meaning even though that an impure person can't eat it, but you're having in mind it should be eaten tomorrow is outside the right time, and that's going to be invalid. Okay. Let's think about it. Meat before the blood is thrown is not fit for consumption. And then once you have the wrong intention, so you could invalidate it. So too here, even though someone who's impure is invalid, but the wrong intention could invalidate it. So says the Gemara, Velohi, Hasam Zarik Umegzi, Hakaloi Megzi Klal. There's a big difference. By a regular case, once you throw the blood, so now the meat is fit for consumption. As opposed to here, after you throw the blood, the meat is still not fit for consumption because the person is impure. So you can't bring a proof from a regular case of pigul to a case where you want someone to eat it in a state of impurity. So the proof is not a good proof. Rav Chisda said that there's something which Rav Dimi Bar Chinina often quoted. It was very Margal Pume was like a gem in his mouth. He would say it all the time. So Basar Pesach Shlo Hutzla Valachme Toida Shaloi Hormu Chayav and Alayim. If you don't roast the Pesach and you don't separate out of the 40 breads you had to bring with your thanks offering, with your korban toda, you have to take some of it off and give it to the Kohen. So if you don't roast the Pesach or give it to the Kohen, chayav and alayim, you're chayav. Chayav and alayim mishum tuma. There's still going to be, if you eat it when you're in a state of tuma, it's still going to be a problem, even though you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You didn't give 4 out of the 40 challahs to the Kohen. But if you still eat the korban in a state of tumah, it's still going to be a problem. So, Amarava Teda, Rabbi wants to bring a proof. The Tanya Asher LaHashem, L'Rabos Emuri Kachim Kalam L'Tumah. The verse says Asher LaHashem to include the sacrificial parts of the Kachim Kalam of the less holy sacrifices for tumah. That if you eat them in a state of tumah, so that's a violation. Alma Afagav Dlaben Echilinu. You're eating sacrificial parts, things that are usually sacrificed, not that are consumed by humans. It's not for human consumption, and yet you eat it in a state of impurity, so you have violated the prohibition. So too here, when you eat things you're not supposed to, but if you do it in an impure state, you have still violated the prohibition. Okay. So Hachanami, I forgot. So too here, if you didn't roast the Paschal offering, or you didn't separate the four breads that you're supposed to, and yet you still eat the sacrifice in a state of impurity, then you have violated what the Torah wants. So says the Gemara, no, there's a big difference. At least those sacrificial offerings, they are fit for consumption by something, by the altar. By the korban pesach, if it's not roasted, and by the korban toda, the Thanksgiving offering, that you haven't separated 4 out of the 40 loaves, so then that's not fit for anybody, not for the altar, not for you. Lishna achrina ha'imurin lo chazi velohi chazu l'mosayu ve'hani lo chazu klal. So another version saying the same thing is that the sacrificial parts are not fit for anything. They are fit for something. They're fit for the altar, as opposed to these, the Thanksgiving offering or the korban pesach, which has not been roasted. So that's going to be fit for nothing, and therefore you cannot bring a proof from one to the other. Yeah. Okay, next chapter. Good morning, Jules. Good morning. Here we go. Jules says, no, Beishama Umrim, that. So now we're going to talk about the applications of the altar, meaning you have to sprinkle blood on the altar, and a chatas offering has its rules, and other offerings have their rules. And the question is going to be, let's say you have to sprinkle either once or twice. You'd sprinkle it on the corners, so it gets to 2 of the sides. So if you sprinkle it twice, it would get to 4 sides, meaning the 4 corners. If you sprinkle it once, it'll get to 2 sides, meaning to the 2 corners. So let's say you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You only did 1 application of the blood. Does that suffice? When the Torah says you have to apply it numerous times, it means, and if not, there's no atonement, or it just means that that's the ideal state. But if you only do 1, that's also going to suffice. At the end of the day, you still threw blood onto the altar. Here, Joseph. Personal tissue boxes. Yeah. Only here in Portland. Yeah. So here we go. Base Shamai Omer. Kol Hanitanen. All the things that are placed. Alam is back. All the blood placements on the altar. Hachitzon. We're going to have the outer altar and the inner altar. There'll be four sacrifices that you get brought on the inner altar. Called the so you have the when the community airs, like we saw in Horios, that's the inner altar. When the Kohen Gadol brings it, we saw that in Shavuos, that's going to be the inner altar. When people air in terms of Avodah Zarah, that's going to be in the inner altar, and the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is also going to be on the inner altar. But everything else, the blood is sprinkled on the outer altar. If you just put 1 blood application, that is going to atone, even though many of them need to have 2 applications. Ubechatos, chatos, you need shtei matanos. But by a chatos, you need to put 2 applications, which ends up going on 4 corners. Right, each application is going to hit a corner. It's going to get both sides of the both sides. So a regular offering, if you just do 1 application, you have atoned, even though many of them require 2 applications. Ubechatos shtei matanos. By chatos, you have to do 2 applications. Beis Hillel omrim av chatos shenina b'matanachas kiper. Says Beis Hillel, even a chatos, if you just do 1 application of blood sprinkled onto the altar, so that is going to suffice, and you have been atoned. Lefikach, therefore, let's say you do the first application properly, that's hashniya chutz l'zmano, and the second application you have a wrong thought that you're going to consume the meat outside the right time. So is that pigel or is that not pigel? If the offering requires 2 applications, and you applied 1, and then you messed up on the second one, so is that pigel or is that not pigel? Says the Gemara, keeper. No, that's good, because according to Beis Hillel, once you apply the first one, so you have been atoned for. If you do a second blood application and you mess up, that is not going to ruin your atonement. Similarly, if you do the first application and you have in mind that you're going to consume the meat outside the right time, and then for the second application you have in mind you're going to consume the meat outside the right place, so usually 2 thoughts don't get you piggle. However, since the minimal requirement is 1 essential application, if you mess that one up, so yes, you're a chayav kares. If you're going to mess up on 1, have in mind the second application. Just, if today you're sprinkling blood on the altar, you should know if you want to have in mind the wrong application, it should be the second blood application. Because since the first one is the essential one, once you do that, you're good to go. Okay. So, yeah. Now we're heading towards the applications on the inner altar. So, when it comes to the inner altar, if you miss 1, it's like you've not been atoned for it all. Meaning, the inner altar has different rules. It's much more strict than the outer altar. And the inner altar, you have to apply all of them. If you miss 1, so that's a 0. Sounds like that. Well, good. Something out the word ki'ilu. I would also prefer that. I mean, it's not like as if you weren't atoned for. It's you were not atoned for. The word ki'ilu is as if. So some take it out. It makes more sense. Low keeper. Therefore, nasan kulan kitiknan. If you apply all the applications like they're supposed to. Good morning, Steve. Yeah. So va'achas. If you don't say good morning, the va'achas. He's gonna get you. No, look, it's taking up psula. If you apply all of them properly and one of them improperly, that's going to be psula of ein bokar. That's going to be puzzle, invalid atonement, and there's no covers. So, two main things. One is that when the Torah says you have to apply the blood, so one application seems to be enough. However, there's a difference between the inner altar applications, which we had 4 sacrifices, and the outer altar. The inner altar seems to be no leeway, and the outer altar there is leeway. And now, even within the outer altar, there's a machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says that the chatas has to have the 2 applications, and Beis Hillel says no, even 1 application is enough. So fine. So now we need a source for this. How do you know when the Torah says apply 2 applications? What's the source that if you apply 1, it's going to atone? So, Taner Rabbanan, Minayin, but it's not like it's a bad example. It's a bad example because it doesn't say in the Torah, but explicitly, but you know, if you keep 39 prohibitions on Shabbos, as long as you keep 1, you're good to go, you know? It doesn't work that way. So Taner Rabbanan, Minayin, Lini Taner Alam, is Beyach Achita Shacham Akash Keeper. How do you know that on the outer altar, if you apply 1 application, that you have been atoned for? Hamad Lomar, V'dam Zevachim Yishbo. If you place the blood onto the altar, 1 placing, it sounds like just 1 placing, that's going to be enough. Shvicha, Rashi says, Shvicha is to pour. So it just says you should do 1 pouring. So Rashi says that Shvicha Achas Mashma. Sounds like 1 pouring is enough. It doesn't say you should pour it around, which would maybe mean more pourings. 1 pouring is going to suffice. Now, this we're going to bring, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 other places that this verse is used for something else, to which it's not available to teach us our Mishnah, and I have to find either a new source for the Mishnah, or it's going to be a dispute, or that's it. Says the Gemara, really? This verse that's found in 12th chapter of Devarim, or some say Deuteronomy, or some say Devarim. So it's the 12th chapter, and it says there that you have to pour the blood. So now let's see what else it's used for. You need it for the following brisa. Top of the next page. How do I know that the blood applications require that you have to pour the blood onto the altar, even the remaining blood in the vessel? How do you know that after you applied all your applications, you look at your vessel and you see, oh, there's still blood left over. So what do you do with that? So we touched upon a little bit called shirayim, called remnants, and the remnants you pour onto the altar. How do you know that's true? Our verse. Talmud Lomar, V'dam Zevachim Yishbo. You have to pour the blood onto the altar. So this brisa is using this verse to teach us that leftover blood in the vessel must be poured onto the altar. Yeah. So, okay. So that. Now, so says the Gemara, so the verse is not available to teach us our halach and our Mishnah that 1 application is enough, because we're already using it for something else to teach us that the rest of the sacrifices, not only the sin offering, which it explicitly says you should pour the remnants onto the altar, but the other offerings, also you learn from here, you should pour it onto the altar. Okay. Says the Gemara, Nafkale midirebi, Tanya Rebbe Omer v'hanisha b'dam. It says the leftover blood, badam yimotze. There, it's talking about achatos. It's the 5th chapter of Leviticus of Vayikra, and it says that by achatos, the leftover blood, you should put onto the altar. She'ain tamalomar b'dam. It doesn't change. It doesn't say b'dam. One second. It doesn't say b'damo. It doesn't say b'damo. It's blood. It says. I think I read it. Badam. Badam. In the plural, right? Maybe I'm jumping. Sorry. What does it mean? It doesn't need to say in the blood that the blood has to be put on the altar. So why does it say the blood? lefi shelo lamadlu elo linitanin matan arba sheteunin matan damim liyisod. So it comes to teach you. We're talking about a bird sin offering, and it says the extra word badam to teach you that a chatos requires 4 applications on the 4 corners of the altar. So that's very good by the chatos. Shar damim minayin Talmud lomar v'hanishar, like the other ones, the leftovers, the other ones badam yimatzeh. She'ein tamar badam. Why does it say the word badam? Umat tamalomar badam. Why does it say it? Limit al kol hadamim sheteunin matan damim lizo, to teach you that all the applications have to be on the foundation of the altar, towards the base of the altar. What is that? Yeah. On the base, yeah. One second. Oh, so from here, the fact that it says that the nishar, that the remaining blood is put on, so this brisa teaches you that the remaining blood in the vessel has to be placed onto the altar. It's the word badam in the section of the sin offering that's a bird. So there you learn from the word badam that the leftover blood in the vessels has to be put on the altar. Our mission that uses the other verse, badam zevachim yishpo, can still be available to teach you that one application is enough. And it'll learn that the idea that the leftover blood should be placed onto the altar from this other place, from Rebbe, but not from the other brisa. Fine. That was the first attempted attack. Next one, the akasi lahachi udasa. This verse that our Mishnah is using to teach us, that the Gemara is using to teach us the law of the Mishnah, that one application is enough, that verse is being used for something else. Sometimes you have to throw and sometimes you have to spill. So how do you know that? So for example, by an ola and a shlamim and an asham, it says vizarka, you should throw the blood. And by a bechor, it says you throw the blood. Now, throwing means that you're at a distance. Pouring means you're right there. Right? If you can pour it, it means you're right there. If you throw it, so then you're a little farther away. So how do you know that things that have to be thrown, such as the ola, shlamim, asham, bechor, how do you know that if you happen to be right there, you can just pour it on and that's okay? It says throwing, but does it mean throwing that you have to do it from a distance? Or no, or you can even do it from close proximity. So how do you know that even if you pour it on your yotze, sounds like that you fulfilled your obligation? Talmud lomar, v'dam zevachim yishpo. If you pour the blood from the offerings, sounds like as long as you pour it, it's okay too. So what do you see? That exact verse. We need to teach you this halacha. So it says the Gemara, our Mishnah must hold Savalak Rabbi Akiva. Says Rabbi Akiva, the Amar lo zrika bechlal shvicha, below shvicha bechlal zrika. Rabbi Akiva says no, they're not included in each other. Throwing is throwing, pouring is pouring, and never the twain shall meet. Now, how do you know this is true? So sometimes if there wasn't enough meat with the Korban Pesach, you would bring your Korban Chagiga, your festive offering too, to have some more meat with you for everybody. So, okay. So now in that mission of the Tanan, you make a blessing. What blessing would you make? You make a special blessing on the Korban Pesach. Birek birchas Pesach, pater es shel zevach. Shel zevach lo pater es Pesach. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael said, if you make a blessing on the Korban Pesach, you can exempt your Korban Chagiga. But if you make a blessing on your Korban Chagiga, you cannot exempt your Korban Pesach. Okay. It is really for Mesechus Pesachim, but the reasoning seems to be, so you could have thought that making a blessing on these things has nothing to do with pouring or throwing. That's what I would have thought. However, right now we assume, and I think it's expanded upon more over there, is that the reason why Rabbi Yishmael holds that a blessing on the Korban Pesach will exempt your korban chagiga is because he holds that throwing is included in pouring. That when the Torah says pouring, you can throw also, and therefore by the korban pesach it says you have to pour it. By the korban chagiga it says you could throw it. Throwing is included in pouring, and therefore you can exempt your korban chagiga by making a blessing on the korban pesach. However, the other way around, he doesn't go. Meaning, it doesn't include pouring and throwing. Pouring is not included in throwing, and therefore, if you would make a blessing on the offering, it has to be on the offering that has to be thrown. If you make a blessing on that, such as the korban chagiga, so then that's not going to suffice to exempt your korban pesach. So once again, korban pesach is something which is poured onto the altar. Korban chagiga is something which the blood is thrown onto the altar. Rabbi Shmuel says that when you make a blessing on the korban pesach, you can exempt the blessing for the korban chagiga. The logic seems to be is because since throwing is included in pouring, so therefore it's like subsumed under the other sacrifice, and one could exempt the other, even when it comes to hilchos brachos, but not the other way around. Rabbi Akiva says no. Lo zu pateres hazu, lo zu pateres hazu. They're not included in each other at all. Not pouring into throwing and not throwing into pouring, and that's this opinion that, and therefore he'll disagree with the brisa that says that as long as you pour the blood onto the altar, it's okay. If the Torah says you have to throw it, you have to throw it. Pouring it from close proximity is not going to be good. So our verse is still available to teach us that one application is enough to atone. Third attempt. Akasi lachi udasa mi bailach edanya. We need for the following brisa. Rabbi Shmuel omer mitoshin emar ach. Okay, so now there's a verse in Bamidbar. It has a whole list of animals. Ach bechor shor. So your bechor ox, your bechor kesser, your bechor sheep, bechor ez, your goat. Lo tifta, you shouldn't redeem them. Kodesh heim, they're kodesh. You gotta give to the Kohen. Throw their blood on the altar, and their fats get sacrificed to Hashem. Okay. So now, it says you should throw the blood onto the altar. So lamanu the bechor sheton matan damim. It says there that the blood of the bechor, of the sacrifice, should be thrown onto the altar. The emurim and its sacrificial parts should go onto the altar. What about meiser, the animal that's the 10th animal? Who pesach on the korban pesach? Minayin Talmud lomar v'dam zevachecha yishbo. It comes to teach you that the blood has to be poured onto the altar. Yeah. So what do you see? That verse is not available to teach us the law of our Mishnah. So it says the Gemara, our Mishnah must hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Did Tanya, and we're going to go back to this for a while. Did Tanya Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer? It doesn't say this. I was going to say earlier. Damolo namer ela damam. In that verse that talks about throwing the blood onto the altar, it doesn't say its blood should be thrown, which would then be referring to only the firstborn. It says damam in plural. Their blood should be thrown. That verse that's talking about the firstborn is coming to include not only the firstborn you have to throw the blood onto the altar, but also Meiser and Pesach, also the 10th animal and the Korban Pesach. Those also need an application of blood onto the altar, and their fats have to be brought up onto the altar. Yeah. Okay. So. Fine. So therefore, our verse of Dam Zevachim Yishpoch is available because that Brisa learned out by Meiser and Pesach, we learn from a different verse, from the plural usage of the words blood and fats. Fine. For what we need is the plural word of blood. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel. So at the end of the day, Rabbi Shmuel ended up saying two things with this verse, V'dam zivachim yishpoch. He used it that throwing is, when it says throwing and you pour it, it's going to be good. And he also used it for what we just said, that the Meiser and the Pesach, if you throw that to teach you that you have to throw their blood onto the altar too. But at the end of the day, from the three brises that we brought to try to attack our Mishnah, we learned two things from Rabbi Shmuel, and he used the same verse. So how did you use the same verse to teach you that when it says throwing, you could pour? And the same exact verse, V'dam zivachim yishpoch, pouring the blood of the sacrifice, taught you that that the mice, the 10th animal, and your Pesach offering should be, you have to apply the blood onto the altar also for those animals. How'd you use one verse for two things? Says the Gemara, Trei Tanai, I'll leave with Rabbi Shmuel. It was two Tanaim according to Rabbi Shmuel. There was a dispute. What did Rabbi Shmuel hold? What did he hold? One opinion held that he used the verse to teach you when it says throwing, you could pour. And one opinion held that Rabbi Shmuel held that the blood of the Korban Pesach and the blood of the Meiser of the 10th animal has to be thrown onto the altar. So his two students had a debate. What did their Rebbe hold? Yeah. Yeah. This happens nowadays all the time. The second one of the big halakha authorities passed away. So something he said is up for dispute. No, he said no, like this, one like this. So I have a recording, I wrote it down. Everything depends on the context, who he's talking to, where it's from. Okay.
Yeah. Verse for one thing, you for another.
That's a good assumption.
How do you know which comes first when you use the verse?
Well, right now we're saying that it cannot teach you two things. There's no first second, just a dispute. It does teach you X, it does teach you Y. But yeah, which that makes logical sense. No, like how could one teach you two things?
You have,
2 plus 2 equals 4, but you don't say anything about multiplication from there. I don't know, maybe a bad example, but
no, I understand. But how do you know which gets used for that particular verse? How do you know how to match or map it?
Oh, meaning why did he choose it for that versus for that? Yeah, that's the question. Right, that's a question. Either he had something else for the other law, yeah, or there's something in the verse itself which hints you. It depends on the verse, depends on the grammar, depends on the context. That's a good question. Right, yeah, that's a question. I assume each time it's going to be its own. There'll be its own answer. One answer fits all for that. Yeah, good. Yeah. Certain commentaries on the Torah are the ones that are busy with. There's certain that they take the applications of the Gemara from the Psukim and they try to show you why they even expanded anything. What's lacking in the verse, they have to expound it. And then where they see this, well, I think a whole school of exegesis, I guess, as we call it. Okay. Yeah, sounds Christian, I know. So Bishlam, yes. So Bishlam al Rabbi Shmuel. So okay, the latest thing that Rabbi Shmuel taught us was that the verse by a firstborn is teaching you that you have to apply the blood from the 10th animal and a Korban Pesach onto the altar. Apply the blood. Bishmal Rabbi Shmuel demokim la kule the bechor. So okay, here's a good example. The second Rabbi Shmuel, right? He did not expound anything in this verse to teach you about a Korban Pesach or about a firstborn. It was all talking about a Bechor, because the entire verse is talking about a Bechor. It was Rabbi Yossi Aglili who used the extra word damam, or not the extra, the plural of damam and chelbam, its blood and their fat, to teach you it applies to other things. So now, Bishmal Rabbi Shmuel the Mokma Kule Bechor, that the whole verse is talking about a Bechor makes sense because the next verse says, Ubisaram Yelecha. The very next verse says that their meat should be for you, for the Kohen. So now we have the previous verse told you by a Bechor, you have to apply its blood and its fats. Blood on the altar, fats on and fats at the sacrifice. The plural of the word blood and fat, Rabbi Yossi Aglili expanded to refer to other sacrifices, such as the Korban Pesach, such as the 10th animal, the one you tie. So fine. But now, according to Bishol, it's very good because the very next verse says, and it's meat, you should go to the Kohen. What's the problem? The Meiser and the Korban Pesach, that meat does not go to the Kohen. So it's much more logical to interpret the entire verse as referring to the Bechor. So maybe that's why, yeah, okay, fine. So he learns the whole verse to be like that. Elul Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who interprets the verse, the first verse, to refer to include other offerings such as Meiser Pesach, Demokila Meiser Pesach, Meiser Pesach, Bailim Achlile. So the owners eat it, not the Kohanim. So Mayu Bisar Miela. What does it mean? And their meat would be for you, the Kohen. What's that referring to? So it says the Gemara, Echad Tam v'Echad Balmum. So the reason why I used the plural was really the verse was including the blood and the fats of the Meiser and the Pesach offering. The fact that it used the plural in the next verse with Bistarim, their meat should be for you, their meat was not referring to all the offerings that were mentioned in the previous verse. Their meat was referring to two types of firstborn offerings. One is going to be one that has a blemish, and one is going to be one that's a tam, one that's pure. So the let's see, limaid ala bechor balmum shenita the Kohen, to teach you that a bechor that gets a blemish is given to the Kohen also. Not only the meat of a regular firstborn goes to the Kohen, but even of a blemished firstborn, because usually if it's blemished, you redeem it and use the money to replace it. But in this case, the plural usage of their meat should be for you. So remember, so one verse tells you bechor, and according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, it also teaches you about Meiser and Korban Pesach, two more sacrifices. The next verse says, their meat should be to you, the Kohen. Who's the there? Who's the plural? Which sacrifices meats goes to the Kohen? Not the Pesach, not the Meiser, and Bechor is only one. There's only one offering left. And it's used in the plural. Their meat should go to you. Who's there referring to? As the Gemara, to teach you that not only is the meat of a regular firstborn animal go to the Kohen, but even the meat of a blemished firstborn goes to the Kohen. According to Rabbi Yosef Glili, Shalom Matina b'chol Torah kula. We don't find such a thing in the whole Torah that a blemished animal, you give that meat to the Kohen. You usually have to redeem it and then use the money to buy a new one. Okay. Fine. So now, how does Rabbi Shmuel, who interprets the entire two verses as referring to a Bechor, how does he know that a blemished firstborn goes to the Kohen too? Rabbi Shmuel Nafkalei from, it says, Ubesaram Yelecha, sorry. And then it says at the end, it should be for you. What does it mean, Milecha Yeh? Says Rabbi Shmuel, Milecha Yeh de Seifa. The end of the verse says that it should be to you, seems to be a little bit repetitive, so therefore it teaches you it should be to you. Obviously, the firstborn should be to you, but even the firstborn that's blemished should also be to you. So now let's go the other way. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who interpreted the verse, which is referring to the firstborn, but it used the plural, its blood, no, it used their blood and their fat to include two other offerings, the Pesach offering and the 10th animal offering. So, according to Rabbi Yosef Aglili, Demokila Nami B'Meiser Pesach, Hainu Dichsiv, we understand what the verse means when it says you cannot redeem it. Lo tipata kodeshem, don't redeem it. It is lo tifta. Sorry, it's holy. They're holy. What does it mean? They're holy. Haim craven ve'ain tmuras and creva. They are holy, and they are brought up on the altar, but not the ones you exchanged for it. So if you take a Pesach offering or a Meiser offering, and you now do Tamura, which is not allowed, and you do it anyways, you exchange its sanctity onto another animal, that cannot be brought up onto the altar. And that's what the verse is referring to. Don't redeem them. They're holy. They have to be brought up on the altar. They have to be brought up, but not the ones you exchanged it for. How do I know that you can't bring those up onto the altar? From the following Mishnah. In Tamura, the Tanan, Tamura's Bechor. Oh, the Tamura of a Bechor. If you exchange the firstborn animal, so you take the firstborn animal and you say, I want this non-holy animal to attain the sanctity of a firstborn. You now have exchanged the sanctity from this animal onto this animal. So now, Ditnat, Tumuras Bechor, Umaiser, and Meiser, and the 10th animal, Hain, them, Vivladon, Vivlad Vladon, their children and their children's children, Ad Sof Kol Olam, until, meaning all their descendants, forever and ever. Harei Hain Kibechor, Umaiser. They're going to be just like the firstborn and just like the 10th animal. Okay, what does that mean? The Yochlu Bemumin Lebailim. And if they get a blemish, the Yochlu Bemumin Lebailim, yeah, they're not going to be redeemed. They're not going to be redeemed. They can be eaten by their owners, meaning the Kohanim. Vitnan, Amar Bishua, Shamati, I heard, Shetmuras Pesach, Kreva, Vitmuras Pesach, and a Kreva. I heard the following cryptic teaching. I don't know what it meant. A exchange of a Pesach offering could be brought, and an exchange of a Pesach offering cannot be brought. What does that mean? Chinese. So the aim, meaning if you don't speak Chinese, if you do speak Chinese, yeah. So meaning, what does that mean? It's brought or is it not brought? If it ain't the farish, I have no explanation for it. It's cryptic, so I don't know what it means. Ella, the Rabbi Shmuel. According to Rabbi Shmuel, the Mokila Kule Bebechor, Rabbi Shmuel, who applies the entire verse as referring to the firstborn. So that's what it means. Ma'aser Pesach, Delo. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So the aim of the farish, Ella Rabbi Shmuel. I only can explain it according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Mokila Kule Bebechor, who applies the entire verse as referring to a Bechor. Meiser u Pesach Delo Kreva, but a Meiser and a Pesach cannot be brought. The Meiser, the Mokila Kule Bebechor, the Mokila Kule Bebechor, Meiser u Pesach Delo Kreva Tmasim Minole. How do I know that if you exchange the Pesach or the 10th animal, that the exchange cannot be brought? So, 1 second, but we didn't answer the 1 second. 1 second. Right, 1 second. Once again, what's the train of thought? The train of thought is, we're in the middle of lost train of thought. According to Rabbi Dovid Gleizer, that interprets the verse as referring to a Meiser and a Pesach offering. So that's what the verse means. They can be brought, but not their exchange, but not the ones you exchange them for. And we brought a Mishnah to prove that. Fine. Then we had a Mishnah that said, according to Rabbi Yeshua, the exchange of a Pesach can be brought and cannot be brought. So what does that mean? So it can only be understood according to Rabbi Shmuel, who interprets the whole thing by a Bechor. So how did that answer the question? 1 second. Sorry. So just go back for a second. We said that he heard this statement that an exchange of a Pesach offering could be brought and could not be brought. So what's that referring to? So it's referring to when after Pesach you exchange, if you still have it around, you exchange your Pesach offering for a Shlomim offering, you could bring that offering. But before Pesach, if you exchange the Pesach offering for a Shlomim, then that cannot be brought because the exchanging of a Pesach offering cannot be brought. How do the Ainli the Farish. So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's very good because he teaches us that the verse is referring to a Pesach offering, and then we say that a Pesach offering is brought, but not the one you exchange it for. So that's very good. Rabbi Yeshua heard a statement that was cryptic that you could bring an exchange and you can't bring an exchange. So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that a Pesach offering is included in the verse, it comes to teach you that if Erev Pesach you want to exchange the Pesach offering onto another animal, that cannot be brought. Fine. Now that's period. Ella or comma. Ella Rabbi Shmuel demokila kuli bebechor. According to Rabbi Shmuel, who interprets the entire verse as referring to a firstborn. So Meiser uPesach delo kreva tmarasan minole. How does he know that if you take your Pesach offering or you take your 10th offering and you want to exchange it onto another animal? If you exchange it onto another animal, that animal cannot be brought. What's his source? Because he interprets that entire verse as referring to a firstborn. Rabbi Yossi Glili interpreted to include other animals. But according to Rabbi Shmuel, how do you know that this halacha is true? So he says like this: Meiser Gomer Avra mi Bechor. Meiser of Xer Shava Avra from Bechor. And therefore I learned from there that just like a Bechor's, if you exchange a Bechor, you can't bring that animal. If you exchange the Meiser, the 10th animal, onto another animal, you can't bring that replacement up to the altar. That's one. Pesach behedya kasabeh. By Pesach, it says it explicitly according to Rabbi Shmuel. It says Kesev Matam Lomar, Im Kesev Larabos Tmuras Pesach, Achar Pesach Shetikar Shlamim, Yochel Af Lifnei Pesach came Talmud Lomar Hu. So the verse tells you, and if you want to bring the sheep, what's it including? It's teaching you that a Pesach offering after Pesach. So if you exchange that offering onto another animal, it'll be a shlamim offering, it'll be a peace offering, and that you can bring up. So if you have your Pesach offering, and now it's already after Pesach, and you want to exchange it onto another animal, that animal will have a status of a shlamim, a peace offering, and that can be brought. Maybe you would have thought that you do the same thing Erev Pesach, on the eve of Pesach, do the same thing, and you can bring that exchange up also as your Pesach offering. That would say no. Who? Erev Pesach, it has to be brought, it and not the one that you transferred the sanctity onto. So that's how you know, that's how Rabbi Shmuel knows that these two offerings, which Rabbi Yossi Aglili included in the verse, that Rabbi Shmuel left out because it was all referring to a firstborn, but he still learns that if you exchange their sanctity, a Meiser, the 10th animal, and a Korban Pesach, then it cannot be brought up onto the altar. One is Xer Shava from Bechor, and one is an explicit verse excluding the exchanged Pesach offering, Erev Pesach. Okay. Fine. Now, the Kol Hanach Tanai, the Mafkile Lahai, Dam Zevachim Yishmak, the Drosh Achrina. So, so, what just happened in the last 50 minutes, right? What happened in 45 minutes? Our Mishnah said, if you sprinkle one application of blood onto the altar, it atones for you. Even when you have to sprinkle more, if you do one, it's enough. How did we know that? We brought a pasuk, if you pour the blood onto the altar. Then we had 3 brisas that used that same verse for something else, which was a difficulty on our Mishnah, to which we reconciled the difficulty and said our Mishnah goes like different opinions. So after all the dust settles, what comes out? Our Mishnah uses the verse Vidam Zevachim to teach you that one blood application suffices for atonement. Now, what about the other 3 brisas that use that same verse to teach you other things? How do they know that the law of our Mishnah is true? What's their source that one application onto the altar is enough for atonement and not 2 and not 4? What's their source? Savri lahu kibeis Hillel. The Amri, they say, Av chatos shenosna matana achas kiper v'yalfi kulu mechatos. So Beis Hillel says that even a sin offering, which requires more than one blood application, but if you do one, it's enough. Beis Hillel says even by a chatos, they will learn every other sacrifice from the korban chatos, from the sin offering. That's going to be their paradigm. Meaning they don't need these other 3 opinions. They don't need another verse to teach you that by other offerings you need a special verse to teach you that one application is enough. They'll learn it all out from a chatos. Our Mishnah seems to disagree with that. That you'll need a special verse to teach you that by the other offerings you have to have a special verse to teach you that that if you apply only one application, then that is going to suffice. Okay, we will stop here.